Hello and welcome back. This is lecture 2 of module 6. In module 6 we are looking at the syntax acquisition by children. In the beginning we had in the last lecture we have talked about the basic some fundamental notions within this, and we ended that lecture with behaviorism. So, the major theories of syntactic acquisition are the same as they are for the major theories of language acquisition. So, we went back to our behaviorism, nativism and constructivism. These are the three most important theories, and we looked at how behaviorism does not quite provide the fundamental ideas as to why syntax acquisition happens the way it does. So, this trajectory, the developmental stages and the kind of mistakes that happen, so on and so forth we discussed. Most important criticism of behaviorism with respect to syntactic acquisition is the poverty of stimulus, which is something we looked at already. So, poverty of stimulus refers to the lack of adequate amount of input that could be subsequently used as an output. So, children are capable of generating millions of sentences that they have never heard. So, how is it? So, there is a very important disparity between input and output, hence behaviorism will not be very useful. That is what we ended with in the last lecture. So, today we will move on with the two more theories that are already there. So, this is what we will be focusing on majorly, because behaviorism is not really helpful. So, here we are talking about two major theories that we are left with now. The generativist approach, now it has many names. So, that is why I have put all of them together. Generativist approach, nativist approach, universal grammar, they all are part of the same thing essentially. So, from now on we will call them generativist approach. The second major theoretical approach that we are looking at is the constructivist approach. Again, this also has many names. They may not be exactly replica of one another. There are slight amount of differences among them, but roughly they come under the same umbrella. So, constructivist approach, emergentist approach, socio-pragmatic approach, functionalist and usage based approach. So, we will not be able to go through all of them due to paucity of time, but roughly we will discuss the major tenets of these two theories. And this constructivist is how we will talk about all of these, the entire group of theories that are under this umbrella term. So, let us start with nativism, which is the most important theoretical construct as syntax is concerned. Of course, this itself warrants a full course, but we will not be able to go into so much of detail, but we will try to cover the most important notions and give you some idea about where they stand with respect to the explanations of the syntactic knowledge acquisition among children. Right. So, we will start with nativism with key components of nativism. Innate knowledge, semantic bootstrapping and principles and parameters are what we will be discussing one by one. So, the primary driving force of this theory is that learning from input is not tenable, simply because input is not adequate. It is not even it's not enough for children to get the relevant information out of that input and then create their own sentences or understand the sentences. Either way, both for production and comprehension, adequate input is never there. Hence, it is not possible. So, what do we do then? This theory says that we have some basic knowledge of the syntactic rules and categories built into the human genetic code. So, we are bioprogrammed to learn language, and that bioprogramming involves some sort of a universal grammar, universal basic grammar which includes the syntactic rules, primary basic syntactic rules that are applicable for all languages. So, that is something that is already coded into our genetic system, and hence we do not learn from the environment, it is already there. So, what is the role of the environment then? So, they basically children they map the language they hear onto the innate grammar. So, there is already a grammar that you are born with, and then in the environment the ambient language provides you some sort of an input. So, children basically map one onto another, and they so that they identify which set of the rules they need to apply. because there is a set of universal rule and there are also language specific parameters that are there as far as this theory goes. So, they need to figure out which set of the rules are applicable here, only that that is the only impact of the environment as far as this theory goes. But for the all practical purposes, we are already pre-fitted. Factory setting already has the basic syntactic rule, that is the idea. So, the question that this theory asks is not how they learn. The question rather is what innate knowledge do they already have. They learn because they have an innate knowledge, that is the idea. But then what is the nature of that innate knowledge? How much is innate and how much is dependable from outside input? That is the point of departure for this thesis. So, in order to answer this, the universal generative approach proposes a number of influential ideas, of which some we will discuss now. We will not be able to discuss all of them, as I just said. So, the universal rules that this theory talks about basically is called the universal grammar. It is called universal because this applies to all languages. Theoretically, it applies to all the languages of the world. So, there is a set of rules that can apply to every possible language. So, this is an underlying sort of a grammatical system. This involves a set of innate universal which constrain the children's hypothesis space. This is a very important idea because the children should not, we have already discussed a little bit about the generalization pattern that the children typically show. So, they need not go completely haywire. Their hypothesis space will be constrained by this set of rules, that innate rules that we have already there, that we already have. So, for example, as a result, this innate grammatical rules have a few types. One of them is called substantive universal, then we have formal universal. Substantive universal, it basically talks about the predispositions for grammatical categorization, certain grammatical features that are universal, that are found in all languages of the world, that is substantive universal. Formal universal on the other hand is it deals with the well-formedness constraints for syntactic representation that apply to all human language. So, substantive universal talks about the contents, the categories, and then formal universal talks about how those categories, how those contents combine with each other, what are the rules that apply for forming sentences. So, together these two make up the majority of what we call universal grammar. Let us look at some examples, as in let us unpack it a little bit. Substantive universal refers to fundamental categories of language that are present in all language. So, when we are talking about fundamental categories, we primarily refer to three different classes of three different types of possibilities. So, one is the word classes. So, word classes as in the different kinds of words like nouns and verbs and adjectives and so on. So, that is the word class. Then we have the second category, which is the phrasal category. Phrasal categories are then noun phrase, verb phrase. So, these are understood to be universal across all languages. Then we have syntactic relations. So, subject. So, nouns we have already seen a little bit of it, how nouns will be finally getting into the position, when they get into the position of the agent, they take up the syntactic role of subject. Sometimes they also take up the role of object and so on. So, syntactic relations of subject object and some other grammatical relations are also universal. Some of them may not be, but majority of them are. So, these together they make up what we call the substantive universal. And then we have formal universal. Formal universal refers to the grammatical form or rules of the language. There are many, but I have just mentioned here the transformational rules. This was of course proposed by Chomsky. So, substantive and formal universals make up the content and the structure. So, the what and how, both of these things are they combine and create what is called universal grammar. Out of this various formal universal, one is also they call the structure dependency principle. Structure dependency principle is nothing but the idea that syntactic operations are dependent on syntactic structure. So, what kind of operation, how do you change one kind of sentence structure to another kind of sentence structure depends on the syntactic structure itself, not on linear order or non-structural aspect of language. So, this is one of the primary aspect of structure dependency principle, which in turn is a part of formal universal. Then comes semantic bootstrapping theory. This is also part of the same umbrella term. So, the semantic bootstrapping theory talks about how the system of combining, how do children go from identifying words to understanding syntax and producing syntax, what is the route that they take. So, this theory says that it takes the route of semantic bootstrapping. How does it happen? First, they will have the syntactic categories will be identified, then syntactic phrases and the syntactic roles need to be identified. So, syntactic categories we have already seen like noun and verb, syntactic phrase will be noun phrase, verb phrase, and syntactic roles will be subject object. So, the noun can have both the role of subject, or in some cases it can be object, like that. Then comes the things like thematic roles as in agent, patient, recipient of the action. So, the boy is playing with the toy, so the boy is agent. What is whatever is the receiver of the action is the patient and the action itself. So, these are the thematic roles depending on whether it is a transitive, intransitive or a ditransitive verb. The number of objects, direct object, indirect object will change and so on. So, these are the thematic roles. Then there is another aspect to the entire bootstrapping theory, which is called the innate linking. Innate linking of rules that tell children how to map one of these onto another, how to map the syntactic category on the thematic role and so on. So, how does it work? Thematic roles refer to the role that people or agents and objects play in any action. So, the eagle caught the mouse is an action. Eagle is the subject, mouse is the object, caught is the verb here. That is the sentence. Now, in this the noun eagle is the agent. So, that is the mapping that is happening, and then you have the mouse, which is the patient, and the action of catching the mouse is there. Now, this is something that the child needs to map, that this is a noun and this has the role of an agent in a syntax. In a sentence, in the syntactic structure, the role of the noun is that of an agent, the doer, who is doing the action, on whom the action is getting carried out, and what is the action. So, these are the things. Understanding this role is easy often because when children are growing up, often the actions that the parents or other caregivers talk about will be happening right in front of their eyes. So, when that happens, it is very easy for the child to map the noun and the role. So, the syntactic category on the thematic role, that mapping is easy because the action sometimes happens in front of their eyes. So, they can observe what is happening. So, thus they are able to identify the doer and the receiver of the action. So, for example, the boy threw the toy car. Now, this is one, this is the other, and this is the action. So, when this kind of an action is very common in a child's environment, so the boy throwing the toy car is easily understood as the boy is the doer and the car is the one that is the patient, that is the recipient of the action. So, this kind of a mapping happens in childhood. Once that happens, then linking rules help them connecting the thematic roles to the syntactic roles. So, identifying the agent will lead to understanding the subject role, identifying the patient will lead them to link it to the object role. Finally, the action itself will get linked to the verb category. This way the child will learn the syntactic roles of subject and object. So, this is how this kind of the entire understanding goes. So, step by step it goes. But sentences are not always in action in front of our eyes. For example, the end justified the means. So, here there is no way of linking the subject and object, because this is all of these are abstract notions. So, you cannot, only concrete things can be seen, abstract ideas cannot be seen, but still children do learn these syntactic rules as well. So, subject object verb rule probably help them assign these roles eventually. So, after starting from the concrete objects, once they have figured out that in a sentence this is how it goes, then they will be able to map, again link it to the abstract concepts as well, and thereby even when the action is not happening in front of their eyes, they will still be able to link the subject role and the object role, even in case when the nouns refer to something abstract. So, is it just some theory, or do we have some evidence? There have been studies that have been carried out to look at how far these theories are tenable. We will look at a couple of examples. So, children's first utterances are typically simple and predictable. The mapping between thematic and syntactic roles are generally canonical. So, their first nouns do refer to physical objects, first verbs to actual actions. So, evidence suggests that children find it easy to learn verbs with canonical mapping between thematic and syntactic role. So, the most important thing happening here is the mapping between thematic and syntactic role. So, the verb, the object, so the doer, that kind. So, agent, patient role, verb and noun and verb, all of that. So, this is the mapping that they need to do. So, it is easy in the initial stages because it all happens in the concrete space, and the actions are observable, and from there they go on the abstract level. So, this was tested by Marantz in 1982. So, the experiment had 3, 4 and 5-year-old children take part in the experiment. The goal was to see how easily children are able to interpret sentences with novel verb. Now, these verbs that were used in the experiment do not exist. They are non-words, nonsense words, and they are calling it novel verbs. So, these are words that have been created and positioned in the sentence in such a way that they will be taken as the verb. Now, the sentences were created alongside some canonical or non-canonical mapping. So, John is mocking the table, that is the sentence given to them, while John pounded the table with his elbow. So, there is an action happening right in front of them. So, there is a person called John, there is a table and he is doing some action, there is some action happening which is the pounding of the table with his elbow. So, and children are listening to this sentence, John is mocking the table. So, in this case mock does not have the actual meaning of the word. This is for the children, this is a new word, it is a novel word, and it means it means hitting the table with one's elbow. Now, there are other sentences also. The table is mocking John while the same action is being carried out. Okay, so, this is where the situation is kind of reversed. So, when you say John is mocking the table and John is actually carrying out some action, it is easy to map the syntactic role on the thematic role because it is happening right there. But in the second sentence, this is not happening. What is happening is actually the reverse. So, the idea was to see if children are able to understand, interpret the second sentence or not as opposed to the first sentence. So, what was the result? The result showed that 3 and 4-year-old children found it easy to learn the meaning of the new verbs in the sentences with canonical conditions. So, this provides a proof that if the mapping is canonical, if the action is happening right in front of them and the mapping is as it is expected to be, then children learn it faster, and that is what we find out. Now, this seems to be a very simplistic story. And many scholars have pointed it out as well that the reason why it happens, it turns out to be very easy in case of English is because English is a nominative accusative language. So, what does it mean? Nominative accusative languages have case marking for the nominative. So, the agent gets a nominative marker, accusative marker is given to the object and so on. So, the case marking makes the story very easy. It makes it it kind of gives it away. So, if you have figured out the nominative marker and accusative marker, you do not really need to do a lot of mental gymnastics, you will be easily able to find out who is the doer and who is the receiver of the action. For example, in the subject position, the third person pronoun he will be used and not him. So, he gave the book to her. So, it is in this case in the subject position, when the person third person pronoun you have to use, it will always be he, it will never be him. So, that is how you will know that it is this is the subject, this is the agent of the case. The same nominative will also apply for transitive sentences as well as intransitive sentence. So, this is how they are. In the subject intransitive sentence is called A argument, in intransitive sentences this is called S argument. Okay. So, in case of object role, O argument, the marking will be different. So, it will be him. So, when the third person pronoun is in a subject position, whether it is transitive or intransitive verb, in both cases the he form will be used. When it is in the object position, the him form will be used. So, it is kind of clear. If you say he, it is the object, it is the agent. If it is him, it is the object in that particular sentence. So, that is how it is. So, the S argument and A argument follow the same pattern, O argument follows a different pattern. So, if you have been able to figure this out, it will be very easy for the child to map. However, not all languages have this kind of a structure. There are languages which have ergative absolutive marking system. In these languages, the A argument and the S argument are not marked the same way. So, A argument is what? A argument is the subject in transitive construction, and S argument is the subject in the non-transitive, intransitive context. So, in these languages, ergative absolutive marking languages, these two cases will be different. Also, the O argument in transitive sentences and A argument of intransitive sentence require absolute case marking in these cases. So, in these languages there is something called ergativity and split ergativity, and this kind of constructions then should make the situation tricky for the children, because there is a lot of things happening at the same time, and children should be making mistakes. Right. So, as per the innateness hypothesis, children speaking the language that have these properties should make mistakes, but data suggests that this is not true. For example, Hindi is such an example. In Hindi, you have different markers for transitive and intransitive sentences, in intransitive constructions. So, Ram ne khaya and Ram gaya, Ram soya. Ram ne soya doesn't happen, right. So, but then at the same time, if you change the tense, also things will again change. So, Ram jayega, then it will not be Ram ne jayega. So, this is what we are talking about. So, this kind of a complex structure should be difficult for children to acquire, but that is not how it works. Similar examples also exist in Quiche Mayan, Georgian and other languages alongside Hindi. So, this is on the one hand. On the other hand, there are some scholars who do not really agree that linking principle would lead subjects to treat S argument and A argument similarly. Just because they look similar, just because in this kind of two kinds of sentence structure they look similar, it does not mean that linking principle will make them see them similarly. Pinker, for example, says that children just need to notice if the case marking for intransitive and transitive agent are identical. They have to just notice it. There is no need to get confused. They will simply be required to notice this much. Languages such as Hindi and Georgian behave like nominative accusative in the present tense, but like ergative absolutive in the past tense. So, this is the kind of complexity we are talking about, but children don't seem to have any problem. So, that is what we leave linking there, and now let us move on to principles and parameters, which is another very important aspect of universal grammar. So, the principles and parameters model has two formal universals. This contains two different kinds of formal universals. So, universal principles that capture universal properties of human language, that is principle, and then we have parameters that provide a finite set of options from which learners can choose. So, principles are universal, parameters are somewhat language specific. So, you can choose which of the parameters to use for which language. Okay. So, this framework was aimed at explaining why syntactic rules are different in different languages, because if we go by universal theory, universal grammar theory, then every language should have the same kind of structure, but that is not the case. If there are languages which are vastly different from one another, we just saw the example of Hindi from English. So, Hindi has ergativity and split ergativity at that, and English does not have that. So, how do those problems, how universal grammar takes care of those differences is what principles and parameters tries to explain. So, in this framework, the child has two types of innate rules. The first is a set of grammatical principles. This refers to what is often called the secret skeleton of languages. So, this is the baseline, basic structural principle and this is applicable for all languages, like all words are assigned a syntactic category like noun, verb, etc. So, this is the principle that all nouns, all words in a language will obligatorily be having will ultimately fall into some syntactic category. So, that is principle. Secondly, we have the parameters, that is a set of parameters which is language specific. So, for example, null subject, the property of null subject, some languages allow this, some languages do not allow this. Hindi allows, but English does not, right. So, if there is a null subject parameter, the child needs to set it according to whether her language allows the null subject construction or not. So, in English it is not possible to simply say is raining, right. It cannot be, this is not a very nice structure in English language. The correct way will be it is raining. Thus, they need to set the parameters to obligatory subject marking, which is the opposite of null subject. So, null subject parameter versus the obligatory subject parameter. The child will need to figure out which applies to this particular language that she is born into. In English, it will not apply, it will not work. So, they have to switch to, so they have to kind of switch on and off. So, switch on the obligatory subject setting in this case, but in case of Bangla, for example, it is fine to simply say khachi. Khachi means eating. First person is the subject, which is omitted here. So, not mentioned, only the verb is there which encodes the first person information, and this is fine, this is perfectly fine to say khachi. If you need to figure out whether it is a singular number or plural number, then you have to depend on context, but otherwise this is fine. So, this is a grammatical construct, hence null subject parameter will be switched on in case of Bangla, that is the idea. So, the process goes like this: first she slots the words into innate syntactic categories, then she sets the parameters. So, once she identifies which words are nouns, she can slot them as subjects. So, we have already seen that they do figure out nouns. So, nouns will become as subjects, or if it is required to be objects. Then using trigger phrases, she can figure out whether her language allows null subject or obligatory subject. Then she sets the parameters to the appropriate setting. So, the principles takes care of the baseline, and then the parameter takes care of the language specific properties, and that is how children will be able to comprehend and produce language, syntactic structure in the relevant language. Some other parameters of the word order acquisition that have been proposed as well. That is a complement head parameter, then we have specifier head parameter, and then we have V2 parameter. This was proposed in 1994. So, these are some of the well known parameters that have been proposed. So, in the complement head or head direction parameter, this determines the position of the head relative to the position of its complement in maximal projections. The specifier head parameter, which determines the position of the specifier relative to the position of the head again, and then you have V2 parameter, which determines whether a finite verb of a declarative main clause always appears as the second constituent. So, these are some of the parameters, and depending on what language you speak, it will be either you will need this or you will not need this and all that. Support for this theory, of course, there is ample literature available on these. You may look up any of those references. So, there are lots of studies that have found support. So, children's knowledge is far more sophisticated than we would expect, and there has to be some sort of a mechanism that is kind of innate in order for them to achieve that without much over teaching or much of innate adequate environmental input and so on. So, there is a lot of support. Some of the studies, for example, are also experimental in nature. So, one well known study is by Valiant 1986. So, what they wanted to figure out is at what age children could use determiners and nouns. They wanted to see when it appears. So, the criteria for the study was children needed to just using determiner randomly will not work. So, in the correct usage will be only when the determiner is used in the correct position before adjectives or nouns or both. So, in case of English it will be like a book, the book, and then it will be a red book or even a not. This will not be a grammatical correct sentence because the is appearing here in the middle, read a book, that is an ungrammatical construction. So, it has to be a read book. So, they need to know the determiner will come before the adjective if there is an adjective before the noun. So, they in crux they need to use the determiner in the correct position. Then they also should not use the determiner as a standalone. So, you cannot just simply say and the, that will not be counted. Similarly, could not be sequenced in a wrong way, there is the dog. So, these were the conditions, objective criteria of seeing when they learn. So, what do the results say? The findings showed that children produce the syntactic categories and use them in the correct way in all cases most of the times. There were few omissions of determiner in some cases, few, not all of them did not fail. This was explained as uncertainty about which nouns require determiner. Now, in English there is a small problem there, not all nouns require. For example, milk does not require a determiner like a and a often. The maybe when you want to specify it, but biscuit does. So, you can always say a biscuit, like that. So, they might be confused between the nouns as to when it needs and when it does not. That is how they had explained some of the omissions that they found. Now, theories have criticisms always. So, critics have pointed out that if children do figure out parameters and they have the principles in place, parameters are figured out, then why do they have omissions at all? Even if few, why do they have them? Right, because we have already seen that telegraphic speech is marked for their omission of determiners, prepositions and other such words, such function words. Only content words are what they typically have. Sometimes they also have very odd constructions. For example, we have I don't, sure, don't like it, and then why the tape recorder don't lie, no, I know, like it, and so on. So, if the principles and parameters are there already for children to figure out very early, these things should not be there at all. So, these are some of the criticisms, and there have been some explanations for them as well. Primary idea is that they take time. They do have the parameters there, they do have the principles also in place, but children take some time. So, for example, English children start with null subject parameter and then eventually they figure out that it will not work. Some aspects of innate knowledge are not present at birth, some mature over time. This also has been proposed as another possible explanation. Similarly, children do have all the principles and parameters in place, but have performance limits. So, one is they do not have all of them, they eventually they need to they have them, but they need time to set it, set the parameters. Another group says that some of the innate principles are not present, but they mature over time. The third one says that it's all there, but the problem is the performance problem, performance limitations, which is not dependent on linguistic capability per se, but it is non-linguistic in nature. For example, limitations of working memory, limitations of attention span and so on. Of course, small children have very short attention span, so that could be one reason as to why they make these mistakes. So, this is where we complete this lecture. In the next lecture, we will carry on with the theories. Thank you.